What if I told you Columbus wasn't the first European to discover America? That's right. Long before 1492, a group of legendary seafarers landed on the shores of North America. We're talking about the Vikings. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson and his crew set foot in a place they called Vinland, which we now know as Newfoundland, Canada. They even built a small settlement. But here's the twist in our real timeline. It didn't last. After a few years of skirmishes with the local indigenous people, whom they called Skraelings, and facing the sheer isolation of their outpost, the Vikings packed up and sailed back to Greenland. Their grand American adventure became little more than a footnote in their sagas. But what if it hadn't? What if the Vikings had stayed? What if they had not just visited, but colonized North America, 5 centuries before Columbus even set sail? Let's dive into that alternate timeline and explore a completely different history of the Americas. For our Viking colony to survive, a few things need to change. First, let's imagine the initial settlement at Lanceau Meadows is more successful. Instead of just a few dozen explorers, a larger, more determined group of families arrives. Maybe a powerful jarl in Greenland or Iceland sees Vinland not just as a source of timber and grapes, but as a new frontier, a place to build a new Norse kingdom, free from the crowded lands and political squabbles back home. This larger group brings more resources, more livestock, and, crucially, more warriors. Second, the relationship with the indigenous peoples has to be different. The historical clashes were disastrous for the small Norse outpost. In our alternate timeline, perhaps a more pragmatic Viking leader realizes that trading is far more profitable than fighting. The Norse have iron tools, weapons, and woolcloth. The indigenous tribes have invaluable knowledge of the land, new food sources like maize and squash, and extensive trade networks. A fragile but functional peace, built on mutual benefit, could be established. The Vikings might trade iron axes for furs and food, creating a unique cultural and economic exchange right from the start. With a stronger foothold and a more stable environment, the Norse settlement, let's call it Nijaheim, or New Home, begins to thrive. Word gets back to Greenland, Iceland, and even Norway. The stories aren't just of wild grapes, but of vast forests, fertile lands, and opportunities for wealth and glory. This triggers a slow but steady stream of migration across the North Atlantic. These aren't massive fleets like the later European powers sent, but a persistent trickle of longships carrying families looking for a fresh start. Over the next century, Norse settlements would spread. They'd stick to the coastlines and rivers at first, just like they did in Europe. The St. Lawrence River would be a Norse highway into the heart of the continent. Small, fortified towns and farming communities would pop up along the coast of modern-day Canada and New England. They would look very different from later European colonies. Think longhouses instead of log cabins, and a society structured around chieftains and free farmers, much like the Icelandic Commonwealth. The impact on the continent would be profound. The most immediate effect would be the introduction of European diseases. This is the unavoidable, tragic part of any Columbian exchange, no matter who initiates it. However, the Norse arrival is smaller, slower, and more spread out than the Spanish conquest. This might mean the devastating pandemics that wiped out 90% of the indigenous population in our timeline are less like a single, explosive catastrophe and more like a series of smaller, rolling epidemics over centuries. This could give indigenous populations more time to recover and develop some immunities. It's still a tragedy, but one that might leave Native American societies more intact and able to resist or adapt. Culturally, the exchange would be a two-way street. The Norse would learn to cultivate native crops like maize, beans, and squash, which are far better suited to many parts of North America than their traditional wheat and barley. They'd adopt indigenous hunting techniques and knowledge of the local flora and fauna. In return, the Norse would introduce iron metallurgy. Imagine Iroquois or Algonquin warriors with steel-tipped arrows and axes, or farmers tilling their fields with iron plows. This technological leap would dramatically alter the power dynamics and societal structures of the eastern woodlands. A new hybrid culture could emerge in the borderlands between Norse and indigenous territories. A Vinlandic culture, blending Norse language, religion, and social customs, with indigenous traditions and technologies. The Norse polytheistic religion, centered on gods like Odin and Thor, might even find common ground with some indigenous spiritual beliefs, leading to unique syncretic faiths long before Christianity arrives. Fast forward to the 1400s. By the time the rest of Europe is getting ready for its age of exploration, North America is already a complex tapestry of cultures. There isn't an undiscovered continent waiting for them. Instead, explorers like Columbus, Cabot, and Cartier would find a coastline dotted with Norse-speaking settlements and powerful iron-wielding indigenous confederacies. When Columbus arrives in the Caribbean, the news that travels back to Europe isn't of a new world, but of a land already inhabited by people from their own continent. The Pope couldn't just draw a line on a map and divide the land between Spain and Portugal. The Norse of Vinland would be seen as a legitimate, if somewhat strange and distant, European society. This would completely change the nature of colonization. Instead of a conquest, it would be more like the complex web of diplomacy, warfare, and trade that characterized European politics. Spain, Portugal, England, and France wouldn't be arriving with a massive technological and biological advantage over a completely unprepared population. They'd be dealing with people who already have steel, have some immunity to their diseases, and have been interacting with Europeans for 500 years. The resulting power struggle would be fascinating. Would the English try to ally with the Norse against the French and their indigenous allies? Would the powerful Vinlandic kingdoms play the European powers against each other to maintain their own independence? The United States of America, as we know it, would almost certainly not exist. The continent might be a patchwork of nations, a French-speaking Quebec, an English-speaking coastal region, Spanish territories in the south, and at its heart, a vast Norse and Algonquian-speaking Republic of Vinland. Science and technology would also be different. The Vinlandic Norse, isolated from Europe for centuries, would develop their own unique innovations, perhaps blending Norse engineering with indigenous knowledge. Europe, in turn, would have had access to American crops like potatoes and maize for 500 years earlier. This could have prevented some of the major famines that plagued Europe in our history, potentially leading to a larger, more stable population and an earlier industrial revolution. The world would be a richer, more complex place. There would still be conflict, still be empires, but the story of the Americas would not be one of simple conquest. It would be a story of exchange, of adaptation, and of a continent that had a voice of its own long before the rest of Europe arrived. The sagas of the Vinlandic heroes would be taught in schools, alongside the tales of Greek and Roman champions. The legacy of the Vikings would not be just one of raids and exploration, but of founding a new branch of Western civilization, one that grew and thrived in the rich soil of North America. So, the next time you think about the discovery of America, remember Leif Erikson. Remember that history turned on a knife's edge. A few more ships, a different decision, a handshake instead of a battle, and the world we live in today could be a completely different place. A world where the echoes of the Viking longship still resonate across the American continent. Thanks for watching. What alternate history topic should we explore next? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the what if.